You mentioned like a number of like different ideas that served as like early anchors for this film. The Riel statue, this like notion of exploring divisive thought, of darkness, narrative sovereignty. So I'm curious just like how these ideas take shape for you when you began making the film. I mean, like what that translation from idea to process looks like.
Um, it really happened through the script, which was unconventional. It was based on the major arcana of the tarot, and it was just like I kind of just like studied this idea of like 22 cards and how there could be narrative between the different cards, and thinking of a narrative like this card is the mirror of this card. So how does the story come through that? And just thinking of all the symbols, like I mentioned a bunch of them before, but there's also one key symbol that I forgot to mention was Manitoba, which, there's like a lot of story about where the name Manitoba comes from, but this like reoccurrent story is this idea of like the sounds of the waves crashing against the rocks in Lake Manitoba, and this idea they sound like bangs. And then in like Korean Ojibwe culture, that could be tied to like Manitou and sort of his drum. So I just had these like characters and ideas like the bang and the color red and the cloth and the sculpture. And yeah, started to think in this like sort of idea of like these 22 chapters and sort of the quote unquote rules of these chapters, and sort of the film kind of came from that. And also a lot of the film was each chapter was had a poem, um, and a very loose metaphorical like description illustration of a card, right? And so yeah, a lot of, when you're thinking in terms of outside of a 3 point narrative, then like time started finish, was a completely different thing that I discovered. Like it's overlapping and intersecting and mirroring, and I sort of started letting go really of sort of like what we expect a story to do or resolve for us and whatnot. And then when we went into production and started engaging with the camera, it just kind of leveled up for me. Yeah.
I do want to talk about your filmmaking, the actual process with your camera, but I do want to go back to the tarot cards
Yeah.
and how that, I guess, structure informed the writing. Like, are the cards that we see throughout the film, reflective of like the order in which you were drawing them, or?
It's based. So basically, yeah, it was like pandemic times, and I went through all of like Sun Ra's required reading lists, and so I was studying like a lot of occult stuff, a lot of theology, and that's where like the tarot came in, and I sort of came to understand the tarot as like sort of this set of symbols and illustrations that have all possibilities that could ever exist in this world, and sort of yeah, my practice, I'm not interested in like making a film that'll make me $1 million and what, I could easily fictionalize my life and be at that level, but I'm more interested in sort of like what I don't know and sort of knowledge with the intersection of the realities of my life and sort of what these means on sort of material and intangible levels. So it just became sort of this exercise of sort of like widening my scope and grasp on what sort of the world is and what the hologram of bureaucracy and politics is and media, space.
When you were like messing around, did I don't know, did tarot like change? I don't know the way you think about like um, the meaning of images and like how images associate with one another, since so much about that process like rests on like the visual symbolic meaning behind an image, and also this dialogue
Absolutely.
between
Yeah,
kind of
I
like.
think images run the world. And I think like so many filmmakers don't actually think of like their responsibility as image makers. And even if, I do a lot of studying uh, native languages and the morphemes and images as like consecutive, like consistently tied to spirit or something that's hyper sacred. And so when you think you're on set and you're like talking about a medium shot or a close up, these are like vulgar ways to think about something like such as an image. So I really think all my films are about images, and especially this one. And yeah, in my engagement with the camera, like we aren't operating within sort of a establishing medium, close up, close up, close up, close up. I think, we're approaching the image on set, and sometimes we're more interested in what the shadow is of the person is saying, or and the tarot too was all images. It was like me just like writing something that was like full of images, full of symbols, full of, and those symbols became costumes, they became props, they became locations, and sort of that poetry really got written into sort of how we made it. And yeah, I really don't, I really don't think that like sort of proper syntax and periods and punctuation is going to like sort out what we're dealing with as human beings on planet Earth. And so I think it was like an exercise in thought and manifestation, and I think of prophecy, which is why I think of Louis Riel, and so yeah, it can get dense, yeah.
So how did that, I guess, play out when you actually started shooting the film? Because like I understand like the cameras were kind of broken.
Yeah, I guess I've been so lucky to be a cinematographer, aka DOP, on a couple of feature films. I did Emily Atkins' Agatha's Almanac, which has been like a documentary doing a lot of rounds, and also Grace Glowicky's Dead Lover, which has also been doing its rounds. So I especially think for this film, like it was like so amazing to work with Grace and Emily, and I learned so much. But it was like I'm the director now, and so it was really sort of this like idea of rebellion against sort of like trying to like give what is expected of that image, or and yeah, and titillate my eye, and also because of these positions I was in close proximity to sort of the practice of a DOP on a feature length film, and understanding that, yeah, I think the craft really gets weighed down in sort of like technology. And, we have these cameras and we put on all these things and we put on all these monitors, and sort of it really isn't about seeing anymore. It's really about this sort of like dictatorship over the process and the story. So for this film, I was just like, yeah, we're just gonna have Bolexes and 3 lights, and the Bolexes are always like broken. But then there's also sort of this thing of like dealing with what you have, and sort of I'm very interested in these ideas I have, and I write a script and I love the script, and I hire all these people to work on the set who've never worked on a film, who are non-actors, and sort of witnessing what happens when a lot of people come together and believe in something that is totally nonsensical in a way, but make it happen, and also really giving over that dictatorship and sort of leaning into sort of I love chaotic people, so I only hire chaotic people who make my life very difficult, but also, leaning into that chaos, leaning into the broken Bolex, leaning into sort of. And with the Bolex, we had to work within 25 seconds. There was no sync sound. So the way we would do it, we'd like get a bunch of takes with actors and then be like, okay, try to do it exactly like you just did it. And like, do sound takes. And so it just kind of adds to that process, and that process of like improvisation, like I'm obsessed with jazz music. And I always think about like, how can sort of a film set be hyper-centered and focused on something, but have room to sort of expand and breathe in. But then, when you need to hit that note, you're coming together to hit that note. And yeah.
Could you talk more about actually developing the like the soundscape in this film, like between, this process of recording sound from shooting and then taking sound takes, and then also putting the score inside that too?
So basically everything outside of dialogue was built in, did not exist, and was built in by my friend Katie. And this is like the first film she made, but she was just like somebody who like really saw the vision, very diligent, very thoughtful. And so it's just like, 100 layers of sound banks. And we were also, looking at the poetry, because there was like a lot of cues in the poetry. There'd be things like, where were you when the North Star rang, and it rang so loud in your right ear, and so it was like, so that's sort of when the chimes are going off, and sort of the left channel goes deaf. And yeah, Katie really took a lot of like amazing leniences with the project too, because she was just like, this is like an animation, like it's a totally like, live action film, but it's shot like an animation, and and it makes sense because I started making films as an animator, and so we just went in deep and just kind of we're like very limitless in the way that we thought about what it could be sonically.
Yeah, and all the effects that we do see are done in camera.
Yeah, all the effects are in camera, so it's like multiple exposures. And
could you talk about like the sun
I know.
exploding?
Oh yeah, well actually the sun exploding is like layers of stuff that I shot for a compositor, and then they put it together. The initial dream was that I would then optically print everything, but we had very little money to work with in post-production, so it just became like a digital thing made out of like textures and things I shot on the Bolex. Yeah.
Well, sorry. Across this film, we're moving between these like three people: this like sculptor, this civil servant, and this security guard. I'm curious, like how you settled on these occupations, and also who these collaborators were for you.
I think I just was thinking about, again, like Louis Riel and Canada and the word and bureaucracy. And this was also like COVID time. So like that stuff got really heavy. So I wanted some character who was like very like much looking for truth in the word. And then I wanted another character who's like more evolved. And then I wanted a character who sort of connected the two through sight and sort of things just I don't remember how the script came together, but Andrina played my cousin in St. Anne, and she was a civil servant, and I really wrote that for her. Val, who plays a sculptor, I've known her son for a long time, and we did a mentorship together. So I really kind of wrote the role. Like once it was like a long writing development period, but once I sort of had an idea of the actors I wanted to work with, I really started to like write for them, and then they got a draft, and then they sort of like told me symbolically what they saw happening, and then that got sort of added into it, like this whole bit with the eclipse photos. Like those are Val's actual photos. That there's this whole story, but she was just like, yeah, this is making me think of my photos, and so we just kind of brought them on set and like improvised this whole thing with these photos of the eclipse. Yeah.
I'll just ask one more question, and then we can open it up. But you brought up St. Anne, and I thought of St. Anne during this movie because St. Anne deals with this woman who's like missing for a while and returns, and this film is also dealing with the son missing for a while and then coming back. And I was just curious if like there's something about this kind of cycle of like absence and returning that was out of interest to you, that you were consciously even thinking about.
I think I'm really just interested in inside outside and the theme of that. And I think like an exit and an entrance is a great way to sort of like experiment and like think through that. And so, I think that's why I'm obsessed with this like action of like leaving and coming back and sort of that moment.
Take some audience questions. Yep, right here. And just hold on until a mic comes to you. And raise your hand high.
Obviously, the film looked incredible. Was there a particular shot that you found most challenging, and why?
There was a lot of reshoots on this film. Like I really wanted to push the darkness, but like pushed it too far so many times. And so that was the challenge, was sort of like, how dark do we let it be and how much light do we let in? And so the whole film for me with the camera was very, very, very difficult. It turned out, but yeah.
Thank you.
I have a question, I guess, about Winnipeg, which is, I'm sure there's a lot of the cinema of Winnipeg that I don't know, but what I have seen is now this and Matthew Rankin and Guy Madden, all of which I think sort of have it's not the same unreality, but there's sort of an unrealness to all three of your work, and I'm curious if you think it's something about Winnipeg that inspires that, or if it's coincidental or somewhere in between, and just sort of where that comes from, if it is Winnipeg.
Yeah, I think it's the province of Manitoba, actually. You know, like Winnipeg is like a very sort of patriarchal colonial idea. But like Manitoba, again, with like sort of the resistance happening and sort of like Manitoba, Winnipeg was sort of like built to be sort of everything was supposed to like come through and sort of was like, envisioned to be this sort of space until the Panama Canal, and then everything got put out. There's like a lot of ley lines that cross in Winnipeg. It's sort of like a very contradictory space. So I think it's just like sort of like naturally what occurs there and what happens there and the energy there, you know, like there's like a lot of stuff that happens like exclusively in Winnipeg in ceremony, and there's like a lot of energy and so yeah, I think it's, and also like this film is hyper Winnipeg, like the time, you know, like Winnipeg is this place where it feels like nothing is happening, but everything is happening. And it has like the densest urban indigenous population. And so there's sort of like a lot of fire and a lot of heat there. And so I think, yeah, the vision sort of comes from like the land. And I think in terms for me, I really try to like, focus on what's kept outside of what these other filmmakers create, and maybe create a more truer portrait of the place, because I don't think that these other filmmakers can actually sort of, I don't think they think about the realities of what is actually at stake in Winnipeg and sort of how the north of Manitoba burns every summer, like it's literal hell. They aren't able to like make space for these actualities and contradictions that exist in this place. But I think they very much are benefiting from the energy that comes from all that's happening and the activity in the place. Yeah.
We can.
Hi, thank you for the beautiful film. I was listening to the soundtrack before watching the movie. It's really, really beautiful and striking and interesting. Could you just tell us a little bit about how you ended up working with the composers and the process?
Yeah, I work always with Brett Paranto, who he scored my film Saint Anne. Like anytime we've been in art exhibitions together. The way I found Brett, actually, I was at an art opening at Urban Shaman. And there was these like crazy collages that looked like my film Domus. And I was like, who the fuck did this? And people were like, it's this guy Brett and he makes sound. And right away I was like, I need to like know him and like what his sound stuff is. And we major clicked, and I work super freely with him. Like I'm kind of just like, give me what you want, give me what you got. Like, and so he just like, settled on these like sort of classic string loops that I loved, because I felt like it kind of brought like this like old Hollywood vibe to everything. And they're all tape loops also. He's like all analog. There's no like stems in his files. They're very like simple. And then once we had the score in, the intention was always to like sort of remix a little bit because the score comes before the images also, and the images are cut to the score, and then we add more to the score. That's how we do it. And so I worked with Chris Harper and Nick Dorado, and then they like just like went wild and like added all the synth stuff, which I think really brought out like the science fiction tone to it. Like it seems so out of nowhere, but I really adore what they did with the score. Yeah.
I haven't, I guess, you know, what you were saying about this and about like Winnipeg, and really what you were commenting on in your introduction, how this sort of like regional specificity, these like historical forces and like also like cosmic and spiritual forces are kind of like interacting in this film, but are always just maybe just under the surface. They kind of persist more as like atmosphere in this film, but it is like felt for me as a viewer. But like as you said in the introduction, it's like not, it's deliberately not spelled out. And I'm wondering like how, or at what point this atmosphere like really becomes clear for you, if it's like found while you're shooting or really editing, or like not
The
until
edit.
yeah.
Yeah, like I think there's like the film I think I'm making, and then there's like this process of discovery through the edit, and I think that's 100% why I'm a filmmaker. You know, I don't ever want to make something that looks like the script I wrote out. It's just about that process and that self-growth and sort of my relationship to images, and sort of they really fuck with your life. You know, I am very careful about sort of what I make in terms of images, and I've really felt this with this project, how it's like, you know, I made this sort of work and it really has like come into my life as like a story in some weird way. And you know, people were like, it's cursed. And I really felt that curse. You know, we let it go though, it's okay. But so I think there's just there's like the material and the metaphysical, and there's also like always like the anchor of the collective belief, which is sort of what I focus on as a director and self-producer, is like instilling that collective belief and holding it, you know, so tightly. And there is such a family vibe. Like this is a very low budget film, and so we would do this thing called crew as extras. So basically, like everybody behind the camera, you like see them, and they're in front of the camera, and you know, the credits is a record of like who's actually in Manitoba. And and I think you know, most of the actors are either, you know, Cree, Ojibwe, or Dene, or Métis, but they're very much stripped of sort of like these sort of cultural markers that the sort of white gaze of the industry sort of like is like, that's a Native person, you know. There's none of that. We're just sort of in this world, and we're sort of collectively interested in like sort of, so how do you associate with sort of a person if they sort of are stripped of sort of what we expect them to be. And I'm still figuring this film out, right? Like the edit and sort of the way that things worked out is vastly different than sort of that script and sort of what I experienced on production. And this is the second time I see it, the second time I introduce it. It sometimes feels like unfair to be sitting here and speaking to this thing that I'm still sort of trying to figure out and also let go of. Yeah.
I think we're out of time, but you know, your credits say we're all levers.
Yeah.
When did that come up?
I mean, that's like the point of the film, I think. It's just like we're all levers. It's like from this Opiensky book called The New Model of the Universe, where he was like, I figured it out. I figured out the secret to life. We are all levers, you know, and it's just like one action has a reaction. But I have pins. If anybody wants a pin, I will give them away. I'm sorry, I'm doing a plug.
Okay, I'll take a pin.
I also have like I think like 6 or 7 limited edition I Survived the Day the Sun Went Out t-shirts as seen in the film. I'm just going to show them, but if you want one, come talk to me. I'm selling them. But yeah, 7 left. Limited edition anyways. But yeah, thank you all.
Thank you.
Yeah.